the sort of progressive folks recognize that when person A leaves a company and goes and joins a related company, it sets up opportunities later for joint ventures, cooperation agreements, all these other sorts of things, because there's relationships cross-pollinated. You bring sort of this abundance mentality, but now we're deep into the sort of cultural realm, Andy, and we're here talking about let's get the structural stuff right, and then people are going to start to behave better.
Hi, friends. Welcome to the Sales Enablement Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Paul. That was Erik Host-Steen. Erik is the founder and CEO of SMP Alignment, which is a revenue consulting firm. And in our conversation today, we talk about the importance of internal alignment within your organization, being internally aligned and helping you hit your revenue targets, and how the lack of alignment between sales, marketing, and your customers leads to missed targets, certainly higher churn, and lower retention of key employees. We dig into what Erik calls the Round Canoe syndrome, which I really like, which is a metaphor for what happens in a misaligned organization. And Erik shares the frequent causes of misalignment, which are primarily related to being insufficiently clear within your organization about who the customer is, why they should buy, and how they want to be treated. So we get into all of this and much, much more. But before we get to Erik, I want to remind you to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to it. And also I remind you to check out my latest book, Sell Without Selling Out. It's a modern human-centric framework for increasing your win rates and shortening decision cycles without using the salesy behaviors that your buyers really dislike. It's available everywhere you shop for books, online, and in stores. Okay, let's jump into it with Erik. Erik, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Andy.
Pleasure. Yeah, we were just talking before we start recording. We've been, LinkedIn acquaintances for quite a while. But we finally get a chance to talk to each other.
Yep, long-time listener, big fan of your content. Glad to be here.
Thank you. Well, glad you reached out about coming on the show. I like some of the stuff you write as well. I'm interested to dig into it. So for people who aren't familiar with you, tell us about you and what you do.
Sure. My name is Erik Host-Steen, and I'm based north of Denver, Colorado. And for the past 6 years, I've been running a consulting practice that I call SMP Alignment. The S is for sales, the M is for marketing, and the P is for product.
Right.
And the idea, pardon?
No, I was just acknowledging it. Yeah.
Okay. And the idea is that the core reason why commercial teams aren't hitting their targets on a regular basis while simultaneously smiling and not wanting to choke their neighbor is because they lack alignment.
And I presume you're not talking about structural alignment from a physical standpoint, but organizational alignment.
Yes, I put things in buckets. The structural alignment is different than the sort of cultural alignment. Thinking that if you get the structural stuff right, there's less reasons for people to tap into their lizard brain passive aggressive behavior that poisons so many teams.
Well, let's dig into that. So how'd you come up with this idea that alignment was and we're going to focus mostly on revenue, but we can touch on other issues that it causes, but the lack of alignment is the root cause for teams missing sales targets, for instance.
Yeah, it came into focus over time. My first ever role, I carried a bag. I was a salesperson, trained under the Sandler selling methodology, and when we had good product market fit, it was pretty easy. And when we didn't have product market fit, it was a big headache trying to get the rest of the organization to change the things that were needed to establish that fit. I moved on and did a pure marketing role, and was really frustrated with the way the sales team translated our messaging into our customers' worlds.
Shoe on the other foot, yeah.
Yeah, and then here comes the other piece. I spent 9 years in a product role where thankfully I had control over the voice of customer, upstream marketing, translating that into requirements for an engineering and design team, and then the messaging that went back out. And here's the secret. You talk to customers, find out what they need. You have someone build it, and then you tell them you have it. It works pretty well.
It works. Well, yeah. I mean, here's the thing, though, and I touch on this a lot on the show recently, is just that this idea of talking to customers and really understanding in multiple dimensions, understanding what they need in multiple dimensions, it doesn't happen nearly as often as it needs to.
Definitely right. And we're all sort of talking to customers with our own perspective and our own goals,
right,
that are not something you say, not the customer's goals in mind.
Yeah. Well, it starts as something, and I'm sure we'll get into how this all sort of aligns with alignment, so to speak, but is that, even starting with hiring, right, is you talk to hiring managers and they're trying to fill a slot and they've got a job description and job responsibilities description and sort of an ideal candidate profile they've created. And I ask hiring managers, well, have you ever asked your buyers, your customers, what they need from your salespeople in order to help them do what they need to get done? And the answer is like, never.
That's right. We didn't think of that.
We didn't think about that. Here's the people that are, basically, as if you subscribe to sort of the jobs to be done theory, our customers hiring us to help them make a decision and make a change.
That's right.
And we never ask them what they need from us.
That's right. I'm a big fan of jobs to be done theory, and it's a big part of what I bring to my clients, because it clarifies so much.
Well, I think it does. I mean, so few people talk about it sort of from the selling perspective or the buying perspective. But I've believed for a long time that basically, your buyers are trying to accomplish, as I write about in my new book, is your buyers are trying to quickly gather and make sense of the information they need to make a good decision with the least investment possible of their time, attention, and resources. That's what they're trying to do, when they evaluate new products, make changes. And I believe, they hire the salespeople to help them do that.
Definitely, right? I as much experience as I've had in sales, I have yet to make anyone buy anything from me. All I can do is help them along the journey.
Right. And so if that's the case, if they're basically hiring us to help them make a decision, don't we understand what the attributes are we need in people to help them do that?
That's right. And then we watch Tommy Boy or Glengarry Glen Ross and say, oh, that must be what we need.
Well, I like Tommy Boy, but I'm not hiring somebody to be Chris Farley or David Spade. But I mean, and that I would think, even though it was not one of the things you sort of list and you write about alignment, to me that seems like that's a part of alignment, is that we have to be aligned with what the buyers need from us. Definitely.
It's like I find I try to take things in three steps. One is trying to define these outcomes first, and then defining the people and processes that are needed to do that. And then thirdly, what's the tech that's going to use to support all that? But this idea of people, right? Until we figured out what it is that we're trying to do, and we don't know what skills we need on the team, right? Do we need the sort of hunter or the traditional farmer? Those labels, not always helpful, but still thinking through that and how that maps to the buyer's journey is powerful.
Yeah, I mean, has a buyer ever said to a sales organization, has a customer ever said to a vendor, we really need your salespeople to be hunters? Yeah.
A little while ago, you were sharing the sort of idea of typical hunting is way more inbound focused.
It is, yes.
Right? You stand up in the deer stand and put out bait and wait for unsuspecting prey to come by.
Right.
And close them.
Yeah. And then we close them, right? Literally. Yeah. I mean, it's not just deer hunting. I mean, obviously, if you ever duck hunt, you sit in a duck blind and lure ducks to the area.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah, our hunting is very inbound these days. So I know
Right.
some people, go out and stalk with bow and arrow and so on. That's different. But by and large, most hunting, recreational hunting done inbound. So, one of the things you'd written about, and it sort of informed what we'll talk about here too, is you write about the Round Canoe syndrome. And I thought that was really interesting. So tell us about the Round Canoe syndrome.
Yeah, thank you. So, round canoes, you might think, what the heck are these? They do exist. The technical name for them is coracle. And if you go to Nebraska and
you said, just so can you spell that?
Coracle, coracle. And they're sort of old, wicker base, like take a round circle of bone or whatever when the original folks that designed this, and then wrap it with, hide or whatever. And it's a round sort of fishing vessel that's usually designed for one person. But if you go to Nebraska, they have Nebraska Tourism Board has this stuff they call tanking, where you can take a big galvanized steel stock tank and put it in a river with a bunch of your friends and maybe a cooler of beer and float down the river.
Not maybe, but yes, I'm sure that's a required part of it.
It's real. It's real. It's a real thing. Nebraska tanking. And that's maybe a fun way to be in a round canoe, but it's really a metaphor for what happens in an organization that lacks structural alignment. And I like to think of it this way. If we take a sales leader, a marketing leader, and a product leader, put them in this round canoe, and then the CEO hands out paddles and says, okay, team, let's start rowing. We get a circumstance where the boat doesn't really go in a straight direction, and oftentimes people are rowing against one another, maybe picking the paddle up out of frustration and smacking the person next to them like, hey, we're going this way.
Or just paddling in circles. It sounds like that. End up with 3 people doing it. So what are the causes then of round canoe syndrome?
Yeah, so like I was mentioning before, there's cultural components to this, and then there's structural components to this. And culture, let's just define that broadly as how people interact with one another on a human-to-human level. Through my own experience. Sorry?
No, go ahead. I'm sorry. No, I think we have a little bit of a delay here. I'm sorry.
Okay. Hope we have great producers on the other side. And so the idea is that from my own experience, trying to get people to change fundamentally is a brutally horrible thing to do successfully. So, but if there's good structural alignment around a few key things, one is the answers to 3 key questions in the commercial ecosystem. Who are your customers? Why are they going to give you their money? And how do they want to be treated while going through this journey from awareness all the way through to retention? Lots of things start to fall into place. Messaging, go-to-market strategy, how you structure the sales team, what level of marketing effort you put into it, these sorts of things that build up the commercial ecosystem. And the other piece is just this sort of idea that if you don't know where you're going, any path will get you there. And a lot of leaders of organizations have these sort of big, lofty visions that kind of make sense, but the way it gets translated to what happens on the field, it's a mess. Here's an example, and to bring in some politics just to get things exciting. You think about Make America Great Again and Build Back Better. From an English language standpoint and a vision standpoint, you say, those are pretty similar, but we know, right, they're pretty darn divisive, and there's very clear differences about the sort of tactical things underneath that support these visions that sound great, but clearly are not the same.
Mm-hmm. Well, so let's go back to the cultural thing, because you write that you need to stop trying to fix culture by fixing people. So what do you mean by fixing people? I mean, it's people aren't able to change?
People are able to change. But there are loads and loads of psychologists and therapists out there trying to get folks to change, even when they've identified the fact that, hey, I need to change, and it's still not happening. So, just think about people in your world. I'd really wish so-and-so would do this, or I really wish so-and-so would act more like that. These sorts of things are cultural in nature. But I believe that people are behaving the way they are typically because of incentives that drive them that way. And sometimes, traditional sort of problematic area in a commercial team is that you'll get a sales team that's measured on revenue and a marketing team that's measured on leads. And that's an example of structural friction that creates sales folks that are out focusing on closing deals. Doesn't matter what the deal looks like. And marketing people that are, hey, we got a live one here. And if you were to just easily measure a marketing leader based on revenue, the immediate question is, I know I don't sell anything, so I better go talk to the sales team and figure out what they need to be helpful, to be successful. And that's a big change in cultural behavior driven strictly by structural incentive.
Okay. So, yeah, just thinking through that. So what you're saying is you can change culture, but you initiate it through structure first.
That seems easier to me.
Okay. Well, I mean, let's look at that from a sales perspective, because I'm just trying to think through there's no shortage of structure in most sales organizations, or let's say many sales organizations. Yet we still have, as we see, we still have, relatively small percentage of reps hitting quota, or, we see win rates are dropping or whatever. And we have these, enduring stereotypes of how buyers, not stereotypes, the actuality of how buyers experience bad sales behavior. Yet the structural incentives exist for sellers to be better and to change, but oftentimes don't. So
Appreciate that.
that's why I'm just
Yeah.
Help me think through that.
Sure. So the structural components need to be in support of proper behavior or what we're trying to accomplish. So one of the other key frameworks that I try to leverage with my clients in the world is what I call an outcome hierarchy. Right. At the top of this is a purpose or a why. And many times these aren't even articulated at all. And then below that, we get a couple other things that fall into place, and that ultimately gets down to a tactical action plan, which is the structural piece of who's going to do what by when and with what resources. And then the last rung of this hierarchy are the metrics and measurements, or the KPIs, OKRs, whatever you want to talk about it, that are usually tied to someone's comp, or should be tied to someone's comp. And when these measurements and metrics aren't connected up this hierarchical chain, we have structure that gets people to behave in ways that are inconsistent with the purpose or the values or the vision of the company or the journey that we're trying to create, experience that we're trying to create for a customer.
Absolutely. That sums it up, right? So, I mean, your hierarchy, you have 5 things that are at the top. You said your purpose, your why, followed by vision, mission, strategic approach. Right.
Yep.
And then your strategic approach.
And then metrics.
And metrics, right. Yeah, so what you're saying, and I think this is absolutely right, is that the incentives built into the bottom of the hierarchy, the sort of the least important part in some respects, aren't in alignment with the purpose at the top of the hierarchy.
Yes, sir. Right? And we can do that at an enterprise level, we can do that at a division level, at a team level, and then here's the cool thing, if we all do it as an individual, then we can start opting in and out and saying, hey, what I'm trying to accomplish with my own life aligns with what it is that we're trying to do with the organization. And then, that's what I'm aiming for. This sort of perfect idealistic world, and I need your help, Andy, to help us get there.
Well, but I think what's interesting about your hierarchy is that, and I think it does, people can look at it and it explains many things, which is, sure, yeah, at the top, you could have leadership saying, we are a buyer-centric organization, right? We are here to help our buyers. And then you get down to the bottom of the metrics and the behavior that it incents, and it's operating at cross purposes to that almost all the time.
That's right. Yes. At the end of the quarter, we're not so buyer-centric anymore.
Not at all. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I write about this in the book. I don't use these terms, but yeah, it's we operate with very little integrity at the end of quarters compared to what we tell the buyers why we're there to help them. Interesting. Okay. Well, that makes sense. So the outcome hierarchy, it's a great way, interesting way to put it. Hadn't really thought about it in that perspective. I like that. So that's where you sort of base your structure initially on that, which then makes the culture sort of become a reality.
Yeah. Now, if we have a team that's filled with narcissists and egocentric folks, we're gonna, when we get these outcome hierarchies documented, it's gonna, most intelligent people that are showing up as healthy adults are gonna say, well, wait a minute, these two things don't seem to match to me. How do we resolve this conflict?
Okay, and?
So, but if, and this is where sort of the hiring process to figuring out, well, we need to have people that can bring some humility to the table, that can have some courage to speak up, and that are comfortable with conflict and team players and all this other stuff. This is where the cultural stuff happens. But I find in my circles, there's a lot of sort of culture coaches out there that help people sort of get in touch with their feelings and act like adults. But then when they're done, we're still like, well, we don't know strategically what to do and how to run this business. Mm-hmm. So it needs both. We need both pieces to work. And my thesis, my hypothesis, whatever, is that the structural stuff tends to tap into people's intellect and left brain a little bit easier than, let's all just be nice to one another, which is, of course, awesome. But until we have someplace to go and something to do, ultimately our businesses are measured at the end of a period based on real metrics on returns. Mm-hmm. And that's what is expected of us from our stakeholders, from our managers, from our CEOs, from our investors, you name it.
Right. Yeah, interesting. I'm definitely be thinking about this more. This interesting perspective to have on it. Because I sort of see there's this missing component. And as I put it into your framework, or I try to put it into your framework, I mean, on the one hand, it seems cultural, but on the other hand, to me, it really seems structural, which is that, okay, with something's in my mind, is missing in the way that we help people understand what their job is in sales. And what I see as missing is just sort of, I call it this level of human behaviors, not sales skills, but human skills.
Yep.
That, leave a hole in most people in terms of helping them sort of connect the dots, I think, and connect with buyers. And it's just, I'm sort of thinking through your structure versus culture is to me, it all seems more structural necessarily than cultural, though I think it has aspects of both.
Yeah, for sure. They're inseparable. I mean, I do believe they're connected. And the other thing that I find in a lot of these conversations is, and here's a tweak on a Socrates quote, and that is that the beginning of alignment is the definition of terms. and being clear on what we really mean when we see structural or what we really mean when we say cultural. These are important things to sort of get clear on, because I was in a conversation this morning and this person kept calling about digital marketing. I'm like, what do you mean? Right? And because the American Marketing Association, I don't know if you know this, that they have a definition of marketing that they review every 3 years by a panel of academics.
Experts.
So, like, this is a term that we throw around all the time, and there's digital marketing, inbound, outbound, blah, 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 blah. And until we're clear, what do you really mean, we get confusion. So this conversation you and I are having around structural versus cultural, the structural doesn't imply that you can force people to behave a particular way, but we can be clear on where it is that we're going and layer in on this variable comp piece parts of these values and behavioral things that might have a significant impact on not necessarily whether you hit your quota, but how you go about doing so.
Which would be a huge sea change, because I advocate for that compensation has to be based on things other than just revenue, because there are certain things you want people to do. You want people to improve, right? You want people to invest in their own improvement. Sometimes companies now, more and more companies, it's still a very small number, but you see this I think hopefully a trend of companies providing stipends, right? Personal development stipends for people within organizations. It should be I believe, part of the compensation, that they actually spend it to get better. And there'd be a way to measure that.
And these are structural components to the package that attracts an employee, that signals we mean it, right? There's stuff behind it besides talking heads.
Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah, I agree. No, this is very interesting. I mean, it's when you make it part of incentive, then it does become structural. Yeah, I mean, I look at it even as like this argument about, not argument, but this, we see these studies that so few sellers, account execs are hitting quota, for instance. 50% or less these days. And there's lots of variables involved with this. But for me is if you wanted to change that, is that you tell, frontline manager or layers of management, look, part of your compensation will be based on people hitting quota. And what I would do is I thought about this is you give them they get a flat fee for everyone that makes quota. So they have an incentive to, if quotas are being set irrationally, management has an incentive to make sure they're set more rationally. But then also managers have a direct incentive to ensure that as many of their people are appropriately developed and managed and coached as possible, instead of, as many managers do, is default to devoting their time to the people they think are their top performers.
Yes. I've heard, I don't know how true this is, but I can see how it's true, like especially in big enterprises where if you add up the quotas of all the frontline sellers, then they are some multiple higher than whatever the senior leadership told Wall Street or their investors they were going to do, because everyone's sandbagging all the way down, and then at the bottom level, like, this number's ridiculous. So there's a structural problem there that leads to behavior that is not what we want from a frontline seller.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, the structural defect there, starting structural, is that what we're doing is when we do that, right? When, just as you said, because companies do that, if you added up, the quota of all the sellers, it'd be some number or some percentage in excess of the committed number that CEO had given. You're dooming people to failure. That otherwise, I mean, this is sort of this basic human psychology is how do you help people build confidence as you let them experience success and help them experience more success? And yeah, when we give quotas set arbitrarily and at random, where it's sort of guaranteed that most people can't meet it, you're saying, look, to a bunch of your sellers, yeah, I'm sorry. And rather than getting them the opportunity to experience success and then, again, build on that success and build their confidence, yeah, just doesn't happen.
So now, right, this is tapping into the real human side of things culturally, right? What are we attracting people that are, I don't know, like an ultra marathoner that just loves these big crazy goals that are just painful to get there, or sort of more sort of normal person that's like, you know what, I'm inspired by something that's a challenge, but if it's too far out of reach, you know what, I'm gonna just come in and paddle my canoe and make it look like I'm working.
Well, I think people end up sort of receiving that message, unfortunately,
Definitely.
And yeah, and I think that we're so stuck in a certain way of doing things in sales or not doing certain things is, yeah, I mean, this has been around forever, right? As a consultant, I walk into an organization, a lot of times work with small, mid-sized organizations, and yeah, I mean, all the good customers are in the hands of a few of the sellers. And it's like, well, how are these other people ever going to hit their numbers if every time you get what you think is a good lead, you give it to your best person or who you think is
Sure.
best going to work the opportunity.
Sure.
And they said, well, because, we want to hire possibility to win the deal. It's like, yeah, but then these people never get the experience of going out and trying to win those deals and you trying to coach them to get better.
Right. We have some certain status quo, some situation that we see, and we wonder why it is the way it is. A good place to look is the incentive structures behind that that are creating the outcomes and behaviors that we're seeing.
Yeah.
And that's a great example. Like, why we give all these great customers to a few salespeople? Let's the rest of us to be like, whatever. And maybe that's okay, but we got to do it with eyes wide open, recognizing the kind of business that we're trying to build and the team we're trying to build.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I had one client that, as I walked in, was doing that. And I said, okay, well then, you've got a team of 7, 5 of these people can go.
Right.
Right. I mean, why are you paying these people?
CFOs don't love that.
I mean, they're not enjoying it. They're not experiencing, yet they were good people. Yeah, we did change that. So it's put things in place to structurally, incentive-wise, is that, you couldn't have, people sitting on account. Was the other thing is, those who had too many accounts, even the people, the quote-unquote good people, they couldn't even work them, right? Weren't able to harvest all the upsell and expansion that they needed within those accounts. So, unfortunately, like I said, that still goes on a little bit. I like that. But I like that. I'm going to think more about that structure driving culture. Very interesting.
Yeah, it flips it on the head, right? I mean, the popular stuff in literature out there is culture, 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 culture. Well, why are people behaving the way that they are already? We've kind of, by the fact that we're focusing on culture, we're recognizing that the behaviors aren't what we want them to be, which is good. But then, let's really figure out why people are behaving that way. And an easy way, at least in my view, is that if we get the structural stuff right, barring that we're hiring, and when the structural stuff is right, it's a lot easier to identify when there's a people problem on the team. Mm-hmm. The people that just are not ones you want to work with, it's a lot easier to find out who those are and wish them well on their next journey. Reid Hoffman talks about this concept of tours of duty, right? Recognizing that people come to companies.
I buy that. I buy into that. Oh, absolutely.
It's great. right? And but it requires some transparency and having this stuff out on the table for it to work. Recognizing that, hey, you're on the part, you see it in professional sports all the time. I mean, the real sports fans, we want to see a rookie come all the way through to retirement, but, hey, you've
Other than
outgrown the
Steph
spot
Curry,
here, and
it's not happening. Yeah.
so we see this in other parts of the world, and then, somehow business is different.
Well, right, and that's one of the big fallacies, right? But I mean, I think this tour. I like the tour of duty concept when I first read about it, because first of all, it more accurately describes what happens. But I think from an employer standpoint, but I think employees have to think about it that way as well. And so when you're planning your career, if you're in sales, and I think I had this outlook actually myself, not knowing the terms by and large when I was, I knew what I was good at after a while, right? After I had a bit of experience, I knew what I was good at, and I knew the situations that I wanted to, not in terms of industry and product, but in terms of, the situation with the company itself, where I could make the best contribution. And I knew it wasn't a career. I knew I was going to be there for a certain period of time.
It's very healthy, right? And then, the sort of progressive folks recognize that when person A leaves a company and goes and joins a related company, it sets up opportunities later for joint ventures, cooperation agreements, all these other sorts of things, because there's relationships cross-pollinated. And you bring sort of this abundance mentality, but now we're deep into the sort of cultural realm, Andy, and we're here talking about, let's get the structural stuff right, and then people are going to start to behave better.
Yeah. But I think getting that structure right and what the expectations are for people within that structure there's still a lot that can be done. Yeah. It seems cultural, but Definitely. It's actually structural. You got me thinking about it, so I am going to go think about that. So, awesome. Erik, if people wanted to connect with you and learn more about what you do, what's the best way to do that?
Sure. I have the blessing or curse that I am the only Erik Host-Steen on the planet, according to Google. So if you spell my name right, you will find me, and we will connect. Website is smpalignment.com, and most of what I do is on LinkedIn from a social sharing and liking and all that stuff point of view.
Yep. All right. Good. Well, Erik, thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy. Hope to be back.
Okay, friends, that's it for this episode. First of all, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. I am so grateful for your support of this show. And I want to thank my guest, Erik Host-Steen, for sharing his insights with us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to this podcast, Sales Enablement with Andy Paul, on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you could leave us a rating or review, easy for me to say, and let us know how we're doing, well, we'd appreciate it. You can do all that on your phone in less than a minute as soon as this episode is over. So thank you for your help. And again, thank you so much for investing your time with me today. Until next time, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.